IBO World Champion, La Bella Bestia, coming to you to show my appreciation for the ring IQ. So if you haven't already,
get guard, but
wow,
Howard,
look at the strength.
follow and subscribe Ring IQ and check out the relay where they cover today's top boxing news.
Welcome to the motherfucking relay. We're covering today's top boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this. Well, it appears that Boxer and Sky's bantamweight pony in that bantamweight show, unbeaten Ebony Jones, unbeaten up-and-comer Ebony Jones, is going to be returning to action on the undercard of Taylor versus Catterall. Against an opponent that has yet to be announced. There are some miles to travel before young Ebony Jones, 23 years old.
More work needs doing before she'll be ready to fight for a title.
Ebony Jones made her professional debut late last year in October. It was her only fight last year. Let's hope that the year of 2022 proves to be a busier and more productive year for her, because she's going to need to be productive to amass the necessary experience in order to win a world title from somebody at this weight.
There were 4 world champions at bantamweight.
WBA champion Jamie Mitchell, who's going to be returning to action very soon against Carly Thumper Skelly. WBC champion of Mexico, Alimkhanuly.
The IBF champion of Argentina, Maria Cecilia Roman.
The WBO champion of Denmark, the 2-division champion of Denmark, the apex predator, what is fast becoming the apex predator of this weight class, Dina Thorthorn.
It's obvious that Ebony's not ready to have a fight with any of those fighters.
Obviously not. She's got to amass more professional experience, as they are vastly more experienced as professionals at this time than she is, and hopefully the year of 2022 will be a productive one for young Ebony Jones.
The beauty of it all is that there were 4 world champions at this weight for her to choose from.
The beauty is she's got options. Several routes to an alphabet title she can peruse. Now, Jamie Mitchell might be all wrapped up with the Matchroom people.
Yeah, WBA title is.
Jamie's going to be fighting Carly Thumper Skelly. If she successfully defends the WBA title, it's conceivable she could have a rematch with Shannon Courtenay. That leaves Alimkhanuly, Maria Cecilia Roman, and Dina Thorslin. Now, I don't think that Ebony Jones is anywhere near ready to lock horns with those fighters.
But one day she might be.
And because all these fighters, all these champions, they're not fighting under the same banner, that's the beauty of it all. She's got options.
Ebony's going to be fighting against an opponent that is yet to be announced.
I think we might see Ebony in action at least maybe 3-4 times this year, which is commonplace for fighters so early in their professional careers. They might get them out there 3, 4, maybe even 5 times if they can. That might be the case for Ebony. I don't expect to see Ebony fight for a world title this year, though it is a genuine possibility, perhaps next year. This is a division that has the potential to be a political division, it being that Matchroom has their prize stallions in this bantamweight show, Shannon Courtenay, Ebony Bridges.
Boxer and Sky have got Ebony Jones.
And I don't expect Boxer and Matchroom to make fights between them when the time comes. I expect that these fighters will be in competition with each other, just not against each other, not in the squared circle. If and when the time comes for them to fight for titles and they perhaps become champions, I don't see Ebony being in the mix with Shannon Courtenay and Ebony Bridges.
And the politics of boxing is why.
The political boundary lines that we've all come to know and love. Don't forget, Sky Sports and DAZN as platforms, they are competitors. Thus, Boxer and Matchroom, they are competitors as well.
The silver lining is that this is a densely populated division.
This is a densely populated weight class with ample fighters for young Ebony Jones to fight to go around. Ample fighters, ample challengers, ample champions. So she will still get to participate in interesting fights when the time comes, but I see politics at some point becoming an issue. I do. For now, she's set to make her second professional appearance on the undercard of Taylor versus Catterall. Keep your eyes peeled for that. Now, a few days ago, it was announced, per tweet from Michael Benson, that Callum Smith is now the WBC's #1 contender in their new light heavyweight rank standings. The current unified WBC and IBF champion is Artur Beterbiev. I don't expect a mandate from the WBC to come down ordering Artur to face Callum, it being that less than 12 months ago, Artur satisfied his mandatory challenger for the WBC, Marcus Brown. That was late last year.
So Callum's in a position to get the shot, but he might have to wait a while.
So the question then becomes, what does he do while he waits. We know that very recently Eddie Hearn made an offer to one of Frank Warren's boys, Anthony Yarde, for a potential Joshua Buatsi versus Anthony Yarde Queensberry versus Matchroom kind of fight. Queensberry versus Matchroom kind of situation. That situation never got off the ground. I didn't expect it to, so...
You saw Frank Warren trying to get an opportunity for his boy David Evanesian by way of Conor Benn.
You saw Eddie Hearn trying to get an opportunity for his boy Joshua Buatsi by way of Anthony Yarde.
Neither Eddie Hearn or Frank Warren are going to do each other any favors.
It's a Cold War, and that's the reality of that situation. Better still,
What's Callum Smith going to do in the mean-in-between time while he waits for a Mando spot?
because he's not actually yet Artur Beterbeef's mandatory challenger. He's simply in a pole position to become one.
You think Eddie will make a Joshua Buatsi versus Callum Smith fight?
No, I think we might see Buatsi lock horns with Craig Richards before we see him lock horns with Callum Smith. What I think the future might hold for Callum Smith hinges on what happens one division below light heavyweight.
Super middleweight.
Super middleweight, where he reigned as that division's WBA Ring Magazine champion for a time. Super middleweight, where very soon Daniel Jacobs and John Ryder are set to be locking horns very soon. I see a situation to where if Daniel Jacobs by some chance emerges the victor, he may then ascend to the light heavyweight division to take on Callum Smith. That's if Daniel Jacobs wins.
If John wins, I'm not so sure he gets a Callum Smith fight.
A Callum Smith rematch, I should say. It's a possibility. I just don't know how likely a possibility it is. But if Daniel Jacobs wins, I could see Daniel Jacobs ascending to the light heavyweight division to take on Callum Smith, because lest we forget, before it even became about Daniel Jacobs versus John Ryder, that's what Daniel Jacobs was set to do. He was set to ascend to the light heavyweight division for what was supposed to be a Joe Smith Jr. WBO title fight set to go down this year. The plans changed. Joe contracted COVID, and
Joe got COVID and Joe's people altered the plan.
Daniel Jacobs is no longer a part of that plan. Thus, he surfaced at Matchroom in what's supposed to be a John Ryder super middleweight fight, and if Daniel makes it through that fight, I could see Daniel moving up to light heavyweight to take on Callum Smith in the mean in-between time. I don't think it's a coincidence that they have Daniel facing someone that Callum Smith has fought before.
John Ryder would be a common opponent between them.
I don't think that's a coincidence. Daniel Jacobs versus John Ryder is set to go down in the United Kingdom, not the United States. You get the sense that what they're trying to do is make the necessary preparations, set the stage for what could be a Jacobs versus Smith fight, provided that Daniel Jacobs makes it through John Ryder. If he doesn't, well, I'm not so sure that Callum Smith would be as receptive to a John Ryder rematch as he might be to a Daniel Jacobs showdown. Daniel Jacobs is a bigger name than John Ryder, after all, a former middleweight champion who locked horns with Canelo Alvarez, locked horns with
Gennady Golovkin.
with Sergio Mora 2 times, gave Peter Quillen his first professional loss.
He gave Sergey Didivianchenko his first professional loss, too.
Daniel Jacobs does have name value, perhaps more than John Ryder, who Callum Smith has already been there and done that with. Looked quite uncomfortable in the process of doing so. Better still, I'd wager that the Callum Smith people would be more receptive to a Daniel Jacobs fight than a John Ryder rematch.
Hey, we'll see if Daniel Jacobs makes it through that fight, because he might not.
Because Callum is already ranked at number 1, he's going to do what he's got to do to protect that number 1 spot and preserve it. Hang on to it long enough that he could see himself challenging for the green belt. Short of a WBC mandate, a WBC final eliminator,
He'll be selective.
fight's got to be worth his while, and I think to Callum, a Daniel Jacobs fight is more worth his while than a John Ryder rematch. Behind Callum in the number 2 spot is France's own Mathieu Bauderlique, a French Olympian who won the bronze,
He won a bronze medal in the 2016 Summer Olympics.
sporting a professional record of 21 wins, 1 loss, no draws with 12 knockouts.
Him and Callum are the number 1 and number 2 guys.
And he could be a guy that Callum sees himself fighting, provided that Mathieu can hang on to that number 2 spot. When the time comes, the WBC might order a fight between them
WBC final eliminator.
to crown a mandatory challenger, because I reiterate, Callum Smith might be in that number 1 spot, but he's not officially Artur Beterbeev's mandatory challenger. He may have to fight in at least one WBC final eliminator before he is awarded that position. That final eliminator might come against Matthew Bauderleek.
What the future might hold for Callum.
A potential Daniel Jacobs fight if Danny makes it past John, or a Matthew Bauderleek WBC final eliminator. Either one of those guys could end up fighting Callum Smith this year. In other news, Maurice Hooker has been offered a date with Conor Benn in April, Hearn reveals. I love the Maurice Hooker fight. I've made an offer to Maurice Hooker to fight in April, Hearn told IFL. Maurice Hooker was talking about going down to 140, which would be mental. Yeah, he could never make 140 and would have to move up. Talks are ongoing with him. I don't think it'll be Robert Guerrero, thank God. I think the Maurice Hooker fight is a better fight. It's a tougher fight than the Guerrero fight, like I said. April is the target date for Conor Benn, so I'll be looking to nail that opponent by the end of the month. I still love the Adrian Broner fight. He wants a warm-up fight, Adrian Broner. But I just don't know who's going to give him a warm-up fight, so we'll see. There's a lot of talk still progressing with him, and a couple of other people in the mix, but I would love to make the Maurice Hooker fight.
Why does Adrian Broner want a warm-up fight for Conor Benn?
Oh, it's been close to a year since Adrian Broner had a fight. I don't think most people realize that Giovanni Santiago fight was in February of last year. We haven't seen him since then.
For a fight set to go down in April, it would be over a year since Adrian Broner had a fight.
Hence explaining why it is Adrian Broner wants a warm-up fight. The article continues, when you've got a global star like Conor Benn, you don't fuck it up by a big balls promoter. Conor Benn will fight anyone. Give me Boots Ennis, give me Virgil Ortiz, said Hearn. But when the time is right, he will fight them, and he will beat them. A date with Hooker could prove to be a challenge Benn has been looking for. Although he's lost 2 out of his last 3 fights, the 32-year-old Hooker has given everything Virgil Ortiz and Jose Ramirez could handle in spirited knockout losses, and I agree. Maurice Hooker off a loss, for my money, is a better opponent choice than Robert Guerrero, the ghost of Robert Guerrero, off of consecutive victories. There's more to boxing than what you see on paper. I think that Mighty Mo Hooker can push Conor Benn to his limits more than Robert Guerrero can. I view Robert Guerrero as cannon fodder for any bright, up-and-coming young fighter.
I don't expect Eddie Hearn to do David Evanesian any favors.
Frank Warren, I should say, who David Evanesian signed with. As I mentioned earlier, there's a cold war between those two, Frank and Eddie. Frankie doesn't want to do Joshua Buatsi any favors by allowing him to fight Anthony Yard. In turn, Eddie Hearn's not going to do Frank Warren's boy David Evanesian any favors by allowing him to fight Conor Benn.
That's how that breaks down.
I'm glad to hear that Robert Guerrero isn't a frontrunner. I'm glad to hear that they won't waste the boxing community's time with a Conor Benn versus Robert Guerrero fight. Not telling you that potentially fighting Mighty Mo Hooker is something you need to shout from the rooftops about, but out of that short list of names, Robert Guerrero, Adrian Broner, Mighty Mo Hooker, I like the name of Mighty Mo Hooker the most out of that short list of names, because Mighty Mo Hooker is a force to be reckoned with. You're not just going to run through this guy. Virgil Ortiz didn't just run through that guy. He had to work for it.
Virgil Ortiz, who's pretty big for welterweight.
Whereas Conor Benn is more moderately sized. I don't think that most people remember how much Virgil had to work for that victory against Mighty Mo Hooker. They likely just remember how the fight ended, but Virgil Ortiz, he had to go through the gears. With Maurice Hooker, he did.
No harm in saying that he had to work for it.
I think Conor Benn, who isn't as generously proportioned for welterweight as Virgil Ortiz, I think he'd have to work for it against Mighty Mo Hooker as well. For my money, that's the better fight that would have the more pleasing aesthetic, as opposed to a Robert Guerrero fight. And Adrian Broner, I have no faith to see Adrian Broner fighting under the Matchroom banner. Finally, in middleweight news, a day or so ago, a story broke to where Andrade versus Alimkhanuly COVID-related development delayed their purse bid, and now it's being rescheduled for the 28th. Middleweight title fight between Demetrius Andrade and Yanibek Alimkhanuly. A purse bid hearing scheduled for last Thursday was originally postponed by 3 hours before being canceled prior to the rescheduled afternoon hearing. A COVID-related development forced the Puerto Rico-based sanctioning body to push back the session to January 28th. The current COVID-19 situation in Puerto Rico has forced the purse bid for 160-pound champion Demetrius Andrade's mandatory defense against Yanibek Alimkhanuly to be rescheduled once again. The sanctioning body announced Thursday it will now be held Friday, January 28th at 11 a.m. at WBO's main offices in San Juan. The unfortunate development gives the pair of unbeaten middleweights another 8 days to either come to terms or figure out a contingency plan that brings brings satisfaction to all the involved parties. Andrade was previously exploring the possibility of an interim WBO super middleweight title fight with 168-pound mandatory challenger Zach Parker, only for too much time to elapse without a deal in place. England's Parker, the current #1 contender for the WBO super middleweight title held by undisputed champion Saul Canelo Alvarez, continues to call out Andrade, though the matter could be well out of their hands. The WBO set a deadline for those two camps to reach terms to consider granting an exception to Andrade's current sanctioning body commitment to next facing Kazakhstan's Alimkhanuly. 3 separate delays could either help revive talks for Andrade versus Parker or allow the middleweight title fight to get resolved without being subject to a purse bid hearing.
This is another Frank and Eddie situation.
Like the 2 situations I described earlier, Joshua Buatsi versus Anthony Yarde, Conor Benn versus David Evanesian. Here, Demetrius Andrade versus Zach Parker.
We've often approached this conversation from the Demetrius Andrade angle
And the Yanni Alimkhanuly angle. But from the Zach Parker angle, things are very easy to understand. It's not hard to get a good idea how all of this might break down because Zach Parker is a Frank Warren Queensberry Promotions fighter, a fighter who currently is in a pole position to challenge Canelo Alvarez for the WBO title or pick up that WBO title should it become vacant. Thus, gambling with Demetrius Andrade, a fight between them, it's not necessary for Zach Parker, and that might be how his people play it, that if your guy Demetrius Andrade wants a fight with Zach, it's going to cost you, and it's probably going to cost you a lot of money.
Zach Parker doesn't seem to be under any obligation to face Demetrius.
By way of the WBO, by way of the sanctioning body that ranks him as their #1 contender. Thus, if he were to take him on, it would have to be voluntarily because he doesn't need him.
Short of an order from the WBO that forces him to fight Demetrius.
You know, without that kind of an order, that allows Zach Parker and his people to play hardball. Maybe they don't even really want this fight, though if you insist on pushing for it, it might cost you an arm and a leg. That's one way to look at the situation.
I'm hypothesizing.
Because there's a lot in it for Zach Parker, so long as he can hold that position, so long as he can hang on to that #1 spot, there's a lot in it for him. Without Demetrius Andrade, he may end up either challenging Canelo Alvarez as Canelo's mandatory challenger by way of the WBO, get an obscene amount of money for doing so, or see himself becoming a champion should Canelo Alvarez vacate the brown belt.
Yeah, should Canelo vacate the WBO title, Zach can pick it up.
In a situation like that, a guy like Zach and his team, his handlers, they might be difficult to negotiate with because they don't actually need a Demetrius Andrade fight. They're already in a pretty good position.
I don't even know how far along they got in their negotiation.
There seems to have been some kind of dialogue between them, though I very much could see the Zach Parker people making things difficult. I could see that.
Demetrius is stuck between a rock and a hard place.
If you don't fight Yanni Beck, you don't get to keep your middleweight title, though you don't seem to have that Zach Parker fight.
The fight's not done.